Hi, I'm Daniel Lucas, and welcome to Book 101 Review. Book 101 is all about the books that I read for the last 40 years. And today I have my special guest. She is MBA and career coach, no other than Miss Ellin Lolis.
Nice to be here with you today.
Welcome to Book 101, Miss Ellen, and can you please introduce more about yourself?
Absolutely. Daniel, thank you so much for having me. It's an honor to be here with you today. So my name is Ellin Lolis. I'm an MBA admissions consultant and career coach with a 98.9% success rate. So I work with high achievers from all different industries, helping them get into the world's most competitive MBA programs like Harvard, Stanford, and Wharton, just to name a few.
Miss Ellen Lolly, thank you so much for sharing your knowledge and wisdom to the world. How to tell a story that opens doors, career clarity for high achievers. Can you tell about this topic?
Yeah. Absolutely. So, over the last 10 plus years, I've worked with a lot of people in getting into the MBA program. And you may think that that might not have a lot of overlap with career planning, but it definitely does, because through the process, one of the things that we're doing is thinking about what are your goals for your career and where do you want to be at the end of it? Where do you want to be 20, 30 years down the line? And what we noticed was that this is one of the few times in people's lives when they would sit down and say, oh, this is what I actually want to do. This is the legacy that I want to leave behind. Because I think in our day-to-day lives, we get so caught up on checking off all of our to-do boxes and then driving our kids around, and then we're exhausted. And so we really don't give ourselves the time to kind of think, what's my larger story? What's my larger picture? So we really focus through the MBA process on creating this methodology of helping people clarify, what is my story? What is my narrative? And how does that play into my career and into my decisions? And what we find is that, talking to clients 5 years, sometimes even 10 years down the line, they say, I still come back and look at this because it's so helpful for me to realize that I gained that clarity. I looked at all of the things that are important to me, that I'm good at, that I want to achieve, and be able to kind of see if I'm hitting those checkpoints or if I want to adjust that. And then how do I translate that into the narrative that I'm telling the world?
Very well said, Miss Ellen. Very well said. Beautifully articulated. Beyond promotions, what kind of doors does strategic storytelling open for high achievers?
Yeah, I think it can open so many doors. And I think there's kind of the obvious ones of it can help you get a better job, right? When you go into an interview, you're really telling a story. You're telling the story of here's why you should take me, right? Here's the story of how I'm going to add value to your company. You're painting a picture of success and essentially encouraging them to buy you, right? When you're applying for an MBA, it's the same thing. Here's a picture of success in your program. Here's why you should invest in me. But if we think about that in other areas of our life, it's similar. When you go into a negotiation with a family member, you're trying to negotiate something you want with your spouse or maybe with your children. The story that you tell around that is really important, but also in other relationships that you have at work. I think having those stories that you're able to bring to the table are really important because ultimately our brains are really wired for stories. So if I come to you with a bunch of facts, a bunch of details, you're probably going to be zoning out, thinking about what you want to have for lunch or how long your commute is going to take today. But if I come to you with a story or I frame it like a story, and that doesn't mean it has to be a, once upon a time kind of story. You're a lot more likely to listen to me and you're a lot more likely to connect with the content that I'm sharing with you. So it can help you be a lot more effective in those day-to-day conversations, especially at work when you're trying to grow in your career, get buy-in from senior leadership, or even just, make some sort of a pitch for investment or something like that.
Miss Allen, why are high achievers specifically prone to struggling with telling their own career story effectively despite of their accomplishments?
I think there's kind of two factors here. I would say the first is that, at least in my work with high achievers, they tend to be very, very data driven, and that's great. A lot of them work on Wall Street or are, McKinsey or Bain consultants, and they're trained to be very data driven and detail oriented. And that's great. But that definitely is not an emotional connection that you can build with people. It's just always bringing data. And so when you're trained as an engineer or in finance or economics, a lot of times you neglect that storytelling part, or you think, maybe it doesn't matter. It's just fluff. So it's a muscle that you have to build like any other. And so it can get neglected. The second, I think, is that there can be maybe a little bit of imposter syndrome. We work with, some of the most impressive people in the world. And even then they come to us and say, I just don't think I'm that impressive. I just don't think I have good stories to tell about myself. And so they really struggle with saying, I really feel like I have something to contribute. I really can see a clear narrative. And sometimes that's where I think working with someone can be really helpful, because it gives you that outside perspective on yourself. And sometimes it can be a little more comfortable too, because for some people it can feel like bragging, right? So having someone else say, no, you're good at this, can be a little validating.
How does crafting a compelling personal narrative actually create the career clarity promise?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think having a career narrative or having a personal narrative is absolutely essential to career clarity. So, kind of like I mentioned before, I think we get really caught up in the day to day. We're just thinking about the next deliverable, the next promotion, or whatever it is. And we never stop to think about, where am I going? Who am I? And what do I bring to the table? I especially see a lot of younger professionals struggle with this. And especially, I think a lot of women that we coach struggle with this, and they just focus on, let my results speak for themselves, or let me just, try to perform, and eventually that'll just open all the doors. And I think, if we stop to think about it, we all know that's not true. We've seen other people get promoted who might not be as talented as we are, but are really, really good at telling their story and really good at selling themselves and advocating for themselves. But I truly believe that you can sell yourself if you don't have anything to back it up, but those people generally don't go super far.
True.
But the best people who are able to sell themselves really have thought about, okay, what is my narrative? Where have I come from? Where am I going? What are my strengths? And what is my cohesive narrative of what I bring to the table? And then they just say over and over and over. They bring that to every conversation. They sell that over and over. And that narrative is really what helps them advance in their careers.
Indeed, the repetitiveness is the key. Consistency as well. Can
Yes.
you outline the core pillars of steps for your storytelling framework?
Yeah, that's a great question. So we have a couple of different steps. The first that we do is we really map out your goals, because I think having that clarity with your goals is really fundamental. And when it comes to career clarity, that's essential. So we look first at, what are your short-term goals and what are your long-term goals? But beyond just mapping that out, we're thinking about, what's the impact that you want to have in those goals? What do you hope that looks like? What do you want to feel like in those goals? Is it all about just, the financial impact in your life? That's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. Or do you want to, make the world a better place or have impact on a certain group of people? I think it's really important to map that all out and understand also how your values intersect with that. We also like to have clients do an exercise that we call your aha moment, which is where you realize that this is what you want to do. I think that can bring a lot of clarity, because a lot of times we're saying, oh, I really feel like I should stick with it and keep going on Wall Street. But if you can kind of bring this aha moment, it can a lot of times show you where your passions are. And if you struggle with a moment that says, yes, this is where it all clicked, this is where it all connected, sometimes that might not be the right narrative and that might not be the right path for you. Once we have that very solid foundation built, then we're looking to add depth and add layers to that. So we do a personal branding exercise, which really allows us to see, what are all of the amazing things that make you, that make you unique and interesting. And I think that's a great exercise to put people through, because the most common feedback that we get is, I didn't think any of these things were important. I never thought anybody would care. I never saw them as strengths. So really helping people tease that out, and then combining all of that into a very clear narrative. So we work on developing a couple of different brand messages. So those are messages, for example, I'm known for being a strong communicator. and bringing evidence. So here's 3 or 4 ways that I can prove that. I have, better than average quant skills. Here's a couple of different ways that I can prove that. And then at the end, we develop what we call kind of an I am statement or a slogan. And the reason I like to do that is because it takes all of that information and it condenses it down to something that's easy to remember, easy to repeat to yourself and internalize, and that can serve as kind of your North Star as you're developing and getting really comfortable using your narrative.
Very well said again, Ms. Ellin. Very well said. Why are high achievers sometimes they misunderstood their values?
Yeah, I think that high achievers a lot of times achieve so much because they're really hard on themselves. They, for example, they close a $50 million deal and they say, I should have closed 3.
True.
This is great. You've really done this. And so I think they come to me a lot of times and say, yeah, but I haven't cured cancer. So everything that I've done isn't really that impressive. So I think they really struggle with saying what has value, what doesn't have value, because I don't feel like I've done anything super impressive or very exceptional. And so that's a big part of what I think we work with is saying, not everybody has to cure cancer to have a good story. In fact, a lot of us have great stories and haven't done anything that would make the front page of the New York Times. But a lot of them have done things that when you stop and look at it, you're how do you not think this is impressive? This is really crazy. We worked with a nuclear submarine scientist once, which was a really interesting project. And just the kind of things that he brought to the table were so fascinating, especially for people from outside that world, which I would say is most of us. And he didn't really see a lot of value because he was surrounded by people doing the same thing every day. So really helping him understand, no. This is a crazy story. This is really cool. This brings a lot of value to the table. That was a really fun exercise to work on with him.
Indeed. So how does your approach transform the dreaded elevator pitch into a compelling microstory?
Yeah, elevator pitches. Maybe someday we'll get rid of them, right?
Yes.
But I always encourage people to think of the elevator pitch not as another public speaking opportunity or another public speaking requirement. Because I think people think, I have to have this perfect, polished 60-minute pitch. If I make a mistake or I use or say it's ruined or I forget a word. I try to help them think about it as an introduction to you, an introduction to your story, what makes you interesting, and have it be more personal and human and conversational. And I think now, especially kind of in the AI landscape that we live in, having that really human and personal connection with someone means more than ever. So really helping them say, okay, be familiar with your narrative. So going back to your brand messages regularly, revisit those. Go back to your I am statement. This is the person that I am. This is the impact that I want to make. Practice your pitch in front of the mirror, but don't practice it with the sense of I'm going to nail every single word and this is going to be a perfectly polished speech. Practice it in a way that it feels like you're really able to own your story and share who you are in a way that doesn't feel like a used car salesman pitch instead of an elevator pitch when you're on the other end of it.
For sure. So, Miss Ellin, as an MBA and career coach, what are your short-term and long-term goals?
My goals.
Yes.
That's awesome. That's a great question. So I love what I do. So no plans to make any big changes in the future, but we are working on launching a platform for AI admissions. So that will kind of democratize the admissions consulting process a little bit more. So watch our site. That should be launched in the next couple of months. So that's exciting to be able to use tech just to make this process a little bit more open to people, because a lot of times the cost can be prohibitive for a lot of our audiences. And so we're always trying to work to make that information available to a wider range of people.
Good luck to your goals, Miss Ellin, and looking forward for more success. What would be your piece of advice for those people out there who want to be like you?
Oh, Um, be prepared to give up your weekends every once in a while.
Yes.
No. I would say have a good team. Really have a good team. I would not be where I am without the people that are around me. I know that might sound cliche, but really, I started this business trying to do everything myself, and I was only able to grow when I said, other people can do this better, as good as I can, or better. And I need to find the people who are good partners who I trust. And I'm so happy that so many people on my team have been with me for 8 years or longer, and really just having the chance to learn with people, bounce ideas off of each other is great. And I think also being a business owner can be very lonely at times, so having someone there that you can just say, listen, I'm super overwhelmed, I just need to get a couple things off my chest, and having someone there to go through it with you, who knows the business, who knows the strategy, who's your partner in the process, is just so important. So I would say find a good team and do what it takes to keep your team.
For sure. And thank you for your advice, Miss Ellin. And can you recommend a book that influenced your journey?
Absolutely. So I would recommend The Storytelling Animal by Jonathan Gottschall. In it, he talks a lot about storytelling and its role in society, its role in our lives. And I really like how he talks about the positives, but he also talks about the negatives. He talks about how storytelling can be used a lot of times to manipulate people, because it can be very persuasive. And I think, especially, as much time as we all spend on social media, that there is a lot of storytelling out there that's being used to sell us things that maybe we don't need or want, or convince us of things that we might not, from a personal perspective, agree with. So I think it's really a great book to understand how we can be better storytellers, understand more about how our brains work, and also just be smarter in consuming media, and also just at work consuming ideas in general.
Yes, thank you for the recommended book, Miss Ellin. And how does an individual's compelling story influence team perception, leadership opportunities, or organizational influence?
Oh, I think it's essential. I think it's essential. Kind of coming back to that idea of, the workhorse is not usually the one that gets ahead, right? I know in my own organization, that's been something that I've had to really develop my own leadership around, is the people who are just doing a great job delivering what I need to do, paying special attention to come and say, okay, what are the ways that we can help you advance in your career? What are your goals? Because I think it's really easy to say, this person's performing great in that role, just let them stay there, let them do their job. Because they're not coming to you and saying, listen, these are my dreams, these are my aspirations, this is what I'm really good at, this is the value that I see myself adding, this is where I want to go. So if you don't know that, if you're not advocating for yourself and sharing that story, especially with senior leadership, especially with the people who manage you, they don't know. And I think it's not from a bad place. It's just we're all busy people. So if somebody's doing a great job in delivering, a lot of times you can just get overlooked. So having that narrative, understanding within the larger narrative of your organization and your leadership goals, and continually bringing that up and advocating for yourself, I think is the key to success. I think if you don't do that, especially within large corporations, you can kind of expect to stay where you're at.
Yes, for sure. In what ways does mastering this storytelling framework build a deeper confidence in high achievers?
That's a great question. I can tell you what I hope. I hope that it gives people the chance to look back and say, wow, I'm a lot more accomplished in ways that are not just check the box or data driven, metrics that I've accumulated on my resume than I thought. I really have a story that I'm proud of that started a long time ago. I've achieved so many different things. It took me so many years to get to this point, and I overcame so many different obstacles to get here. And I hope that that helps build confidence. And I think looking back at those obstacles can be really empowering, because you can say, listen, I've done this before. I've been through worse, or I've gone through more difficult things. Whatever I'm facing now, it's just one more, and I have the experience that I need to go through it. So I hope that those are ways that it can kind of empower people and give them more confidence.
How can a well crafted story help a high achiever refrain a career setback or rejection when networking or interviewing?
Love that. I think that is such a good question. People shy away from conflict and failure all the time. It's constant. And I was talking to a couple of people in the admissions space, admissions directors recently, and they said, please tell us about your conflicts, tell us about your setbacks. Because a good story has some element of conflict or some element of a challenge. If you think about your favorite book or your favorite movie, there is something for the protagonist to overcome. If, Breaking Bad, for example, I love that show. I watch it all the time. If he just, was able to get his cancer treatment paid for by the government, we wouldn't have that show, right? Nobody would watch that. That would be incredibly boring. But because he's not able to, we go through this entire story with him. And so when that translates to the business environment, I think we can't shy away from it. Failure is part of the process. Learning and challenges are part of the process. It's always about how you navigated it and what you learned from it. So really try to think about, okay, be very clear about the challenge, and then be very clear about, here's what I did, here's how I navigated it, here's what happened in the end, and here's what I learned, or here's how I grew. And if you have a follow-up to that, and you can say, and here's later how I applied that lesson and how to win, or how I transformed that into, maybe you got laid off or fired, and then you turn that into an even better job because you were persistent. That can actually turn into something very positive because it shows that you're somebody who can demonstrate leadership or resilience. And those are generally traits that we value in people.
What's the first step you urge readers or listeners to take to start crafting their door opening story today?
I would say really sit down and think about why you're doing it. So what do you hope to achieve with it? If it's for your career, I would say start and think about your career goals first, and then kind of backtrack with that and say, okay, what are all the steps that have led me here? What are the characteristics that back this up? If maybe some people are listening and they're saying, I want to develop my personal narrative, but I'm not really as career focused. Think about some kind of goal, or think about some kind of reason why you're doing this. I think that really helps provide the clarity that you need to have a really consistent narrative, because otherwise it can seem so abstract that it's really hard to narrow it down into something usable.
Very well said, Miss Ellin. Beautifully articulated. But before we wrap up our discussion for today, I'm inviting you to please do listen to my other podcast, people. My other podcast, because my abstract essay is already in 5th season, abstract poetry in 2nd season, and my book 101 review in 5th season as well, comedy 101 in 2nd season, and my food 101 in its 5th season too, geography 101 in its 4th season, and my baby podcast law 101 and mental health 101. Love Letters in 3rd season, Movie 101 Review and Music 101 in its 4th season, and Science 101 in its 1st season, as well as my Sex 101. So please listen to them wherever you listen your podcast. Who might be surprised the value for this statement? Technical experts, executive entrepreneurs, or what a unique insight would they gain?
I think that in terms of kind of the unique insight from thinking about building a career narrative, I think probably I would say early career to mid-career executives are really the people that I would suggest thinking about this, because I've worked with a lot of C-levels, and unfortunately they get to the point where they're in their mid to late 40s. They don't really love where they are, but they just kept going up the ladder without thinking about it. And then when they get to me, there's not a lot we can do in terms of changing their career or shifting their career. There's, only so much you can do when you get super senior in one area. And so if you can have that conversation with yourself a lot earlier and start to develop kind of that narrative, that plan for yourself a lot earlier, and get that clarity, my hope is that you won't be that 45-year-old who comes to me saying, I hate my job and I don't know what to do. And I have to be the person to say, we don't have as many options as we would have had, 15 years ago.
Miss Ellin Lolis, thank you so much for sharing your knowledge and wisdom to the world. And can you please...
Oh, no, sorry. I was just going to say thank you. It's been a pleasure. And you've been a great host. So thank you for having me.
Yes. And can you please invite our listeners to support your advocacy, your what projects that you are doing right now, and please tell them where they can touch with you.
Absolutely. Well, thank you. You've got our site up right now. So that's the best place to kind of follow along. So ellinlolis.com. You can follow our blog. That's where we've got all of our updates. And for our new project launching soon, that's where we'll announce it first.
Yes, people, let's support Miss Ellin Lolis, because if you support her, more and more and more empowering coaching to come, more and more empowering business to come. So, Miss Ellin, thank you so much for your time.
Of course. Thank you. And thank you to everyone who listened.
More to come, people. See you soon.